It's really an honor for me to pay respect to Mr. Fatheazam by talking about his precious life. I've had 45 years of close relationship with him, very hard work, collaboration, and I loved him as my own father. He was so dear to me. First time I met Mr. Fatheazam, I was 21-year-old. It was in Iran. He had come to visit his sister and friends, and at that time we have just started working on Varga magazine, a magazine for children in Persian. That was very close to heart of Mr. Fatheazam, and he wanted to encourage me and really give his support. So we met at that time. He was young and very energetic and full of ideas, and I was very impressed by him. Then we were occasionally in communication. He would give his suggestions and guidance for Varga magazine, and he was very kind and loving. It was 3-4 years later that I was invited for an interview with a committee of the House of Justice about my application, my participation in the competition for the Baha'i House of Worship of India, Temple of India. And 4 members of the House of Justice would meet me, and one of them was Mr. Fatheazam. In fact, he was translating because at that time I spoke only in Persian, I didn't speak in English, and he was translating it for the other members. And again, it was very wonderful occasion for me. I gave answers to some of the questions, and then I left. And a bit more than a year later, I received advice from the House of Justice that I have been invited to give the final design for the temple. And of course, this was a competition in several stages. The first stage was our application and our method of approach, and then it was interview, and then I was nominated to give the design, and if my design would have accepted, then I would be the final, the architect. If not, another architect, the second in line, would have get the chance. Anyhow, and then just 6 months later, my design was completed. I had made a model of the temple, and I went to House of Justice to meet the House of Justice to Haifa. And on my arrival, Mr. Fatheazam called me to say that he will come to my hotel to take my model and everything to the seat of the House of Justice, and then just to open it so that next day members of the House of Justice will see the temple, see the model. When he came, Mr. Faizi also was with him. He had also, Mr. Faizi again, had very, he loved all of the youth, and he was encouraging everyone. And I was one of them, and he was in fact the main concept. He was the main encourager of me to start Varga magazine, and it was because of his guidance and because of his encouragement that I did that magazine. And he was very loving and encouraging, and he was very keen to see the model. So he had come with Mr. Fatheazam. We went to the seat of the House of Justice that at that time was in Western Pilgrim House, and so we opened the model, and when Mr. Fatheazam saw the concept of the lotus, he was very excited, and he told me that for months he wanted to give me a call and tell me that to think about concept of lotus, but he never did that because he thought he may influence I might have another idea, and he may, by telling me that, I may somehow feel obliged to follow that. So he didn't share his views. I was so impressed by his humble humility and his loving spirit that a member of the House of Justice still keeps his comment and his view so that I will have the full freedom. And then from then on, of course, my design was next day or in next few days, it was approved by the House of Justice, and my relationship with Mr. Fatheazam started to become very serious and continuous because Mr. Fatheazam was the member of the House of Justice, the member of the policy committee of the House of Justice that was looking after the progress of the design and then construction and all of that. And from then on, all the period of my work on the Temple of India, and later on 15 years of work on terraces of the Shrine of the Bab and project management of the ARC projects, I was directly under direction of Mr. Fatheazam as the convener of the policy committee that was taking care of those projects. So really, I had a great honor and pleasure to know him very closely and work with him very closely and constantly report to him and be subject of his encouragement and guidance and love. I can say only that I believe most sincerely that if it was not because of Mr. Fatheazam, neither Temple of India nor Terrace of the Shrine of the Bab would have been built this way and by me. Because I was so young and so unexperienced, and it was his help, support, spiritual guidance, encouragement, and love that gave me confidence and energy and force to work all of those years under tremendous stress and pressure. I really owe him a lot, and I think the Baha'i world owes him that. Of course, the guidance and blessings of the House of Justice itself was another magnificent, really it was my main source of support and encouragement. However, I needed that very close, really, guidance that Mr. Fatheazam would provide. Because Mr. Fatheazam was really symbol of humility and devotion. Rarely Baha'is, they know about exactly what he has done and his qualities and his services, the way that I had witnessed from close distance. Of course, Mr. Fatheazam, in my opinion, was one of the most, if not the most outstanding writer in Persian language at his time. The messages of the House of Justice in Persian are the best proof of this ability. As a young boy, when I was in city of Mashhad, youth would memorize the messages of the House of Justice because they were so poetic, so loving, so strong, and so really impressive. And you can see his strength in Persian language, of course, in his other translation and in other books. His translation, one of the most outstanding Persian scholars in literature, Mr. Mujtaba Minawi, when he saw Mr. Fatheazam in age of 23, translated Teraf of Tolstoy and a book Bi Khaneman from Victor Marlowe to Persian. And Mujtaba Minawi says that all of the Persian translators should learn from this young man the meaning of true translation. Once when they were looking for best writing for children, they chose Mr. Fatheazam as the winner of this competition. Then he told to one of his students, and later on when he found that he's a Baha'i, he told him that they were looking everywhere. They couldn't find Mr. Fatheazam. Who is Mr. Fatheazam? And then later on they found that he's in India. That was the time that he was in India. Mr. Fatheazam was a wonderful poet. Hardly anybody knew. I mean, I myself didn't know much. Maybe his personal friends that he had writing letters, communications, maybe they would know. But nobody knew. He never published his poems, and before that. Once, together with his wife, they had come to India, and we had the honor to be their host for a few days in our house. And then I spoke to him about some of his poems that I had seen somewhere, and then I realized how many magnificent poems he has. So I started bargaining with him and insisting to give me those poems so that we can publish it, so everybody can use it. And because I'm a good bargainer, finally I succeeded, and he accepted to give me his poems with the condition that all of the income of the book will go to Varva magazine as his support for Varva magazine, and that so we published that book under the one of the publications of Varva magazine. And the book Dar Intizar Namnam Baran, which later on was reprinted in Canada, was published in India for the first time. And then for the first time, people could see poems of Mr. Fatheazam in his name. But he gave it only to support Varva magazine. And he has written that, in fact, at the beginning of the book, complaining from my bargaining and insisting. Mr. Fatheazam was responsible for all of the gardens of the Holy Land as a member of the House of Justice, a member of the policy committee that was looking over the gardens. And when I was there, I learned a lot from him, and I understood that he had, in fact, the Haram Aqdas, the circle around the shrine of Baha'u'llah, where we circumambulate, and the circle, the second circle around that huge part of the garden, almost 3/4 of the gardens that was established at the time of Universal House of Justice, was all done by Mr. Fatheazam under his supervision and his guidance. And hardly anybody knows. I mean, just he did that during his weekends. He would go there and he would just give instruction to people, of course, online and inspired by the designs of beloved Guardian on the rest of the garden. But there was tremendous knowledge that he had about plants and gardens, and it was magnificent. He was a real artist from every point of view. He was, of course, as I said, convener of the policy committee, Mount Carmel Baha'i Projects Policy Committee of the House of Justice, that took look over all of the construction and work, all of the work that I was reporting once in a week to the committee, every Wednesday morning. And Mr. Fatheazam was the convener of that committee, in charge of all of those guidance and decisions that answering to the questions that I would present to the House of Justice, and liaison between the House of Justice and me as project manager. a very magnificent role that Mr. Fatheazam had in Holy Land, and I witnessed from close distance, was he was really one of the servants, devoted servants of beloved Amatul Bahar Ruhi Khanum, together with his wife Shaqiq Khanum. They were really comfort of Amatul Bahar Ruhi Khanum. They were always with her. They were together with, of course, Mr. and Mrs. Naqshbandi. And Amatul Bahar Ruhi Khanum loved to be with them. Humor of Mr. Fatheazam gave her really happiness, and I always felt that Amatul Bahar was so comfortable when Mr. Fatheazam and Mrs. Fatheazam and of course Mr. and Mrs. Naqshbandi were around. That was she considered them as her relatives, and really it was a great magnificent role, and I learned a lot from respect and from devotion of Mr. Fatheazam in this service. Of course, for me, the relationship of the House of Justice and Amatul Bahar Ruhi Khanum was the greatest lesson that I learned. It was so magnificent. In fact, every time Amatul Bahar Ruhi Khanum would arrive from any trip, all 9 members of the House of Justice would go to receive her. And she was really showered with the love of the House of Justice. And of course, this was all a great, really education for all of the those that they served in Holy Land. Another great role of Mr. Fatheazam was to support, encourage, and shower the youth that they come for service in Holy Land. If these youth, they would have invited Mr. and Mrs. Fatheazam to dinner, he would immediately accept, although all day he had been so busy with the work of the House of Justice and all of that work, but every evening, if they would have invited, he would go. If the other...
It's okay. It's not rain, it's okay.
If the other senior staff would have invited them, they might have said that they are busy, they don't have time. But if the youth, this just 20 years younger youth that they are serving there, if they would have asked Mr. Fatheazam, immediately would accept. One of the great parts that Mr. Fatheazam played, and again, perhaps is not known by most of the Baha'is of the world, is that for 20 years, maybe more than 20 years, he was the member of the House of Justice in charge of the communications with Iran, right at the time of at the heart of the problems of Iran, Islamic revolution, and martyrdom of hundreds of magnificent souls, that many of them were his friends. So he was the one who would hear the bad news first at midnight, would cry all night for it, and next day would present it to the House of Justice. And he was dealing with all of that, with children of the martyrs, with the families of martyrs. And that was a period that you could see really his suffering in his face, in his absolute, in his eyes. The sadness was so crystal clear. Mr. Fatheazam was in love with India, and really every time, 100 times I've heard from him and from Mrs. Fatheazam that his heart was left in India, and I saw how much love he had, how much really excitement he had to see the progress of the Temple of India. And every time I called him from India, he would be so excited to listen to every detail. And any question I would have asked, any help I would have requested, any thing I wanted him to bring to the attention of the House of Justice, immediately, without really, he wouldn't delay half an hour. He would have done that greatly. And of course, you know that Mr. Fatheazam, the time that he was serving in Holy Land, in India, he was one of the main columns of the mass teaching that started in India. India originally, I mean, at the time of Abdul Baha and later on even at the time of, just before Mr. Fatheazam was in India, was really a place with few Baha'is, maybe a few hundred Baha'is, mostly Zoroastrians from Parsi backgrounds, Persian origins. And Indians, they were outsiders, they were not welcome. Secretary of the National Assembly of India, Mr. Shah, told me that when the first time I was invited to go to a Baha'i meeting by Mrs. Shirin Fozdar, that is a great, really Baha'i, Knight of Baha'u'llah and a great servant of Baha'u'llah in India, she invited him to go to a Baha'i meeting. She said, when I went there, Mrs. Fozdar was not there. One of the chairman of the meeting, or one of the people that was there, one of the Baha'is, came to me and said, who are you? What are you doing here? Get out. This is not your place. He said, I was so amazed that I was invited here, but I lost and I just walked out. But fortunately, right behind the door, Mrs. Fozdar arrived and she brought me back and she told everybody. But this was the situation. The Indians were considered foreigners in the Baha'i meetings. They were not there. Only this group of Parsis, they were there. Through the devotion and services of Mr. Fatheazam and few other Baha'is, and of course under the direction of the hand of the cause, Mr. Mahajir, the mass teaching in India started. And then, of course, now India is one of the greatest population of the Baha'is, and it has a Baha'i temple, and it has completely changed to a magnificent community. And really, Indians, all of them, they remember the role of Mr. Fatheazam in all of this. Story of life of Mr. Fatheazam is so exciting and so interesting. The family of Mr. Fatheazam became Babis from the time of Bab himself. So they are one of the oldest Baha'i families. His great grandfather was Fatali Ardestani, that became Babi through Mullah Ali Akbar Ardestani, that himself is one of the heroes of the Baha'i faith, one of the early martyrs of the Babi dispensation, the one that was persecuted together with Quddus and Mullah Sadiq Muqaddas in Shiraz at the time of the Bab. Fatali Ardestani became Babi and then decided to go to visit Azal, that after Babis, they believed he is the center of the faith. So he went to Baghdad. In Baghdad, he realized this is before the time that Baha'u'llah declared as really the head of the Baha'i faith. And of course, he went to meet Azal, and Azal at that time was hiding himself, and he was not showing himself. So he went to the presence of Baha'u'llah, and by just meeting Baha'u'llah, he recognized him. He realized that he should be the head of the faith. And this is, so he was one of the very few number of believers who recognized Baha'u'llah before his declaration. Of course, when he came back and he was in Ardestan, together with Nabil Azam, the writer of Dawnbreakers, they received a tablet from Baha'u'llah. In that tablet, Baha'u'llah called Nabil Azam and Fatheazam. So the title of Fatheazam was given by Baha'u'llah himself to this family. And when Baha'u'llah was going from Baghdad to Istanbul in that historical trip, Fath Ali, together with the King of Martyrs, were in his company. They accompanied Baha'u'llah to his place of banishment. And the horse that Baha'u'llah was riding on that trip was gift of Fath Ali Ardestani. There are almost 7 volumes of tablets of Baha'u'llah to the family of Fatheazam, that Mr. Fatheazam had compiled all of them. When I was doing the exhibition of this museum inside the temple, inside the vicinity, in the vicinity of the Baha'i temple in India, I was looking for beautiful handwriting of Baha'u'llah and tablets to display there, and we chose about almost 20 tablets. Later on we found that all of them are in fact tablets to the family of Mr. Fatheazam. So out of that 7 volume, I have almost 25 of those tablets. Then the father of Mr. Fatheazam himself, Nuruddin Fatheazam, also was a great Baha'i. He was a member of the National Assembly of Iran, later on chairman of the National Assembly of Iran, and he was a treasurer. He was working, he was one of the very senior treasurer of the court of Reza Shah, the king of Iran at the time. That's very interesting because Reza Shah, although he was not very fond of the Baha'is, and in fact he was the cause that all of the Baha'i schools were closed. The only people that he could trust with his money were Baha'is. He selected hand of the cause Mr. Alai, General Alai, to become treasurer of the military, and Mr. Fatheazam was treasurer of the royal court. That's interesting. Mr. Alai was not a general. He was simply treasurer of a very small city in north of Iran at the time that Reza Shah made a coup d'etat as a colonel of the army. He made a coup d'etat. So he came to Mr. Alai and he demanded to get all the money of the government. Mr. Alai said that he will not give it because this money belonged to the Shah of Iran, and unless he received instruction from him, under no circumstances he will hand over that money. So when Reza Shah went to Iran and later on became Shah, called for Mr. Alai, he said, I want a trusted man like him to be my treasurer. And then he had to give him a title because this is treasurer of the army, should be an army man, so he became general without even serving one day in military. So, but Mr. Fatheazam in the royal court was very much close to the family, a royal family, and in fact, Muhammad Reza Shah, the son of Reza Shah, that later on became Shah of Iran, as a young man, as a crown prince, sometimes had money problem. His father wouldn't give him sufficient pocket money, so he would go to Mr. Fatheazam, and he was very kind and polite and generous, and he would have helped him. So later on, when Muhammad Reza Shah became also Shah, he kept him in that position. Now, I told this story because it's very interesting. One day, Muhammad Reza Shah called Mr. Fatheazam and told him that his mother is not well, and he wants to send her to Palestine. That at that time, because there were many Jewish doctors that would would immigrate to Palestine, he wanted to send his mother to these doctors. This was the time of World War, Second World War, and beloved Guardian had instructed that Baha'is are not supposed to go to Holy Land under any circumstances. Even national assemblies are not allowed to ask for permission from beloved Guardian. So Mr. Fatheazam told him that I would be happy to go accompany your mother. I will be honored to do that, but I need permission. The Shah said, I'm asking you to go, what permission? He said, I have to ask permission from Shoghi Effendi, guardian of the Baha'i faith, because we Baha'is are not allowed to go there. He was very surprised, but he said, okay. So Mr. Fatheazam himself sent a request to beloved Guardian, telegram, and very soon received the reply that he is permitted to go for 19 days pilgrimage. By this time, Shah had decided to send her mother to Germany rather than, because he found some good doctors there, rather than Palestine. Mr. Fatheazam went to him and he said, now I have got the permission, I want to go, because I have a great opportunity to visit Shoghi Effendi. And Shah told him that, okay, now if you're going, we also wanted to do some shopping for some nice things for the family from Palestine, and so I will send somebody to go with you to do that shopping. And so this was the period that now Mr. Fatheazam. But this was a very special period because Baha'is of Iran and Baha'is of the world were forbidden to visit beloved Guardian. So because of that, they were all very thirsty to do this. And now for long time, nobody has gone to Holy Land. Now Mr. Fatheazam goes for the first time. Baha'is were all very excited and they were very keen. And Mr. Fatheazam went there. He had 19 days privilege to meet beloved Guardian alone because nobody else was there. And this was he fell in love with beloved Guardian. Mr. Fatheazam said that his father, when he came back, he was in love with beloved Guardian, and anytime he would mention his name, he would cry. So when he came back, all the Baha'is in masses would go to their home to find out about beloved Guardian. And he was talking about beloved Guardian and crying, and specifically would talk about pioneering, because this was the period. Beloved Guardian for a few years would encourage the Baha'is to go to pioneering. But Baha'is of Iran had not registered this very well, and they didn't know what is the pioneering, what to do, how to do it. They were not that bold enough to do this. So beloved Guardian explained everything to Mr. Fatheazam, Nuruddin Fatheazam, and would encourage them that they have to go. So Mr. Fatheazam was constantly telling to the Baha'is that you have to go. And in fact, almost 300 of the Baha'is volunteered to go to pioneering. Now, at the same time, beloved Guardian had told Mr. Fatheazam story of a young man, 20 years old, that he wanted to drop his education and go to pioneering. And the assembly of the place discouraged him, said that you have to finish your education and then go. He sent a letter to beloved Guardian and asked him. Beloved Guardian said, go even if you cannot be member of any assembly. You are going to become pioneer, but you cannot help to be by being member of the assembly, but still you go. And then beloved Guardian proudly would explain that this man could could teach people, and he organized 2 spiritual assemblies, even though he himself was not member of it. And then when Mr. Hushmand Fatheazam heard this story, he was 18 years old and he had just finished his high school. So he went to his father and he said, okay, father, you are telling these stories. I am like that young man and I want to go pioneering. And he could not say anything. He said, so go. Then Mr. Fatah, at that time, all of these pioneers, they had decided to go to Arabian countries. They were going, a large group was going to Iraq. Mr. Fatheazam also went with them. They were staying in Baha'i Center Hazirat al-Quds, sleeping on the roof of Hazirat al-Quds for a few weeks, and then for a few months, couple of months, and then he went to Mosul. 6 months in Mosul, he was working in a shop, selling things, but then government that was suspicious about all of these Iranians that have come to this country, send all of them back, and Mr. Fatheazam had to go back to Iran. But at this time, all of the universities' exams had been ended, so he could not go to any university but a university of literature, Persian literature. So he went to that university. He finished his education. He went very successful up to almost doctorate. He finished his education. Of course, he didn't pass his thesis, but he completed everything very successfully. And then he became a teacher. He was very successful in Tehran. He started working. Fanatic Muslims, they go after him, and he had to leave his job. He couldn't continue there. He went to Shiraz. In Shiraz, he went pioneering to Shiraz. This was the time that Mr. Nakhjavani also was in Shiraz, and so they were together. And in Shiraz, again, he was very successful as a school teacher, but fanatic mullah went after him and insisted and forced the school to fire him, and he lost his job. He came to Tehran. He did so many struggles. Eventually, he went to work as in library of university. He was working there. One day, he was just passing in front of the Indian embassy in Tehran, and he saw that there is an ad that says that there is in Bengal, in northeast of India, there is a scholarship, and they're looking for university in Tagore University, famous poet, and they are looking for there is a scholarship. So he just saw that there is exam right now. He went in and sat for the exam, and he was accepted. When he came home and told his father that he goes to India. At that time, he had married. In 1948, they married. Shafiq Khanum Fatheazam was his wife. She belongs to the family. Grandfather was Janab Mullah Sadiq Muqaddas, and which in a very interesting way, you can see the ancestors of Mullah Sadiq and Mullah Sadiq, the ancestors of Mrs. Fatheazam and ancestors of Mr. Fatheazam were very close friends and were persecuted together. In fact, Mr. Faizi has written a beautiful story about this relationship. When Mr. Fatheazam and Mr. Nakhjavani were elected to the first Universal House of Justice, Mr. Faizi has written a beautiful story about it, relating to Mullah Sadiq Muqaddas and Mullah Arif Baradestani. Anyhow, so Mr. Fatheazam was in this. First, he went alone to Bengal, to this university, because it was not a place for Mrs. Fatheazam, but at the same time, Mr. Fatheazam's father was martyred in Iran by really planning of the head of the Tablighat Islami of Iran, and with a tremendous, really, in a very shameful way, he was killed. And so then the situation of their family completely changed. Mrs. Fatheazam also had to join him there with their son, their young son. They were there, and they were in a very difficult situation at the time because of all of this problem to the family. Hand of the cause, Dorothy Baker, in her visit to India, to Bengal, told them, was very close to them, and suggested that they move to Delhi. Now, Mr. Fatheazam did not have permission. His staying in India was based on scholarship in that university, so he didn't have visa for any other way. But they obeyed hand of the cause, and they came to Delhi. Mrs. Fatheazam has explained this story beautifully, and I also heard from her this beautiful story in India, that she said they had in that time they had come to India, they had only 50 rupees, which is Indian money, in their pocket, 50 rupees. They came to Delhi, they went, they had to rent a place. They went and with one bicycle and their son. They arrived in Delhi, and they looked around, they saw a house in Hazrat Nizamuddin, is a place, Islamic heart of city of Delhi, but it's a beautiful place. Oh, I lived nearby there, and it's very nice, and I've seen all of that area. They found a house, and the fellow was asking 50 rupees advance. So the 50 rupees that they have, they gave it to this man, and they didn't have any money but few coins. Mrs. Fatheazam was telling us that she bought some potato with this change. They went home, and they cooked this potato for their son so that he's not hungry. Mr. Fatheazam took the bicycle and went out, and Mrs. Fatheazam was just resting, was sleeping. Suddenly, she heard that Mr. Fatheazam has come back, and he's carrying some big bags and all of that, and she was wondering, what are these things? He said that he had gone to a market, and they thought that he's a foreigner. They thought he's from embassy. So he asked them if he can buy things on credit. And they said, of course, all of the embassies, they have credit. So he bought all of these things with the hope that he will have the money and he will go and pay back. So they were so happy. They ate something, and now they had this bicycle, and they didn't have anything else to do. So they sat on that bicycle, they went out. Very close by, there is a shrine, Humayun Tomb, is a very famous shrine of a king. And Mrs. Fatheazam said that he suggested that we go up the staircase to the top of the building to see the city of Delhi. And I was hesitating, being worried about the bats on the staircase because it's dark staircase. But anyhow, together they went up. And as they were going up, suddenly they hit, in dark, they hit a man that was coming down face to face, and they apologized, and this man, they came down. The man said, who are you, what are you doing? And they said that they are Persian and they've come. This man was an English gentleman. He was so impressed, he said, oh my God, I'm looking for a Persian because I'm translating something and I need help, and are you prepared to do some help to me sometime, and I pay some money? Mr. Fatheazam said, of course. He said, okay, sometimes this week come to me. He said, right now, let's go. He said, no, right now you have come for your visit. He insisted, no, I come with you. They really needed the money. So they went with him and they talked to him, and they agreed to work for almost 80 rupees per week for this translation. So at least some money, although 80 rupees per week is not, it's enough for some food. And so that was a wonderful beginning. And the same thing again, miraculously, they found visa, because again, Mr. Fatheazam had gone to the Iranian embassy to meet a Baha'i friend, and they came across a military attaché of Iran, came to visit this friend, and then met Mr. Fatheazam, and later on he asked if Mr. Fatheazam is willing to help him in some of his work in the embassy. And Mr. Fatheazam said that, but they don't have visa, and because he was, of course, military attaché of embassy, immediately they got the visa. So really, miracle of Baha'u'llah. In fact, Mr. Fatheazam said when he wanted to go for pioneering to India, he asked from Secretary of the National Assembly of Iran, Mr. Furutan at that time, handled the cause. He was Secretary of the National Assembly. He told him that India is not in our pioneering post, so if you go there, you will not be considered a pioneer. Again, beloved Mr. Fatheazam asked Mr. Afnan, that was going to Haifa, to ask from beloved Guardian what is his recommendation, and he said, and beloved Guardian, he said all during the days that they were there, beloved Guardian didn't mention anything. Last day, as they were going to the shrine, on the way, suddenly he stopped and he turned back and he told Mr. Afnan, tell to Mr. Hushmand that wherever he goes, he will be successful, whether he goes to India or he goes to Arabian countries, pioneering posts. And so Mr. Fatheazam's heart was convinced that this is more accepted by beloved Guardian, and he went to India. So then Mr. Fatheazam and Mrs. Fatheazam, they stayed in Delhi. They became, eventually, he found a job in different parts, in radio and in then also in the National Assembly office, and later he became member of the National Assembly, he became Secretary of the National Assembly, and he was really the source for lots of services in India all of that period. And of course, mass teaching started in India, and in 1963, it was the time of the election of the Universal House of Justice in Holy Land, and Mr. Fatheazam, being the member of the National Assembly, had to go to Haifa for voting. And Mrs. Fatheazam also decided to go to London conference, and it was so they will go there. Mrs. Fatheazam has said this story, very moving story, about their she said the night that they were going to leave the city, it was almost midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, that taxi came to pick them to the airport, together with one of the Baha'i friends that she also was going there. And Mrs. Fatheazam said, I just asked them to let me just say goodbye, to just have a look at the house and say goodbye. And she said, as I was locking the door, suddenly it came to my mind that I will never come back to this place and I will never see this house again. And she said, I started crying. This lady was wondering, she said, are you scared from aeroplane? And she said, no, I'm just thinking that I may never see this building again. And in fact, that happened. They went to Haifa, Mr. Fatheazam went to Haifa, was elected to the House of Justice, and they never went back to India. They never saw that house. And we also are not going to ever see our dear Mr. Fatheazam. We also really lost him, and it's great loss for all of us, for the Baha'i world. I think a very brilliant star has left our sky. Last time I called Mr. Fatheazam just few days before complication, and he's going to hospital. I told him how is he, and he said that I am ready to go. You also should get ready for me to go. And really, it's although his life has been so great and so much magnificent achievements happened because of him, but his absence is a great loss, and I think his place will never be filled.